Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this week's episode of the Season 5 finale of the podcast. I'm still coming to you from snowy and cold Wyoming, but for the final time this year. Today, we're thrilled to have a guest whose journey from the fiery depths of volcanoes to the heated debates of modern gender dynamics is nothing short of fascinating. He's a scientist, a skeptic, and a bold thinker who isn't afraid to question the status quo. Please join me in welcoming Professor Marc Defant. Now, Marc, he was born on August 28, 1951 in Niles, Michigan. He grew up as the son of John P. Defant, a director of a university press, and Martha J. Harper Defant. From an early age, his curiosity about the natural world set him on a path towards scientific discovery. He earned his bachelor's degree in geology and chemistry from the University of Alabama in 1973, followed by a master's in geology from the same institution in 1980, where his thesis explored the geochemistry and petrogenesis of plutons in Randolph County, Alabama. He then pursued his PhD in geology at Florida State University, completing it in 1985 with a dissertation on the geochemistry and petrology of the Western Philippine Island arc, a work that hinted at his future expertise in understanding the Earth's most explosive phenomena. Marc's professional career kicked off with a diverse array of roles that blended academia, industry, and hands-on exploration. He served as a curator of the mineral collection at the University of Alabama's Museum of Natural History from 1973 to 1977, while also working as a lab instructor in geology and chemistry. He gained practical experience as a geological assistant for the Geological Survey of Alabama, an instructor at the Brewer State Junior College, and even as a logging and production engineer for Schlumberger Well Services and Shell Oil Company between 1977 and 1980. By 83, he transitioned fully into academia as a visiting assistant professor at the University of South Florida, rising through the ranks to become a tenured professor in 1994, a position he held until 2023. For much of his career, Marc has been renowned as a volcanologist and geochemist. But his groundbreaking research focused on the origins of the continental crust, where he discovered and defined a unique rock type called atticite. This rock, formed in certain volcanic arcs, serves as a modern analog for the granite crust that emerged over 2.5 billion years ago. His work has taken him to some of the planet's most remote and challenging locations, including Costa Rica, Greece, Indonesia, the Lesser Antilles, Panama, the Philippines, and even the militarily sensitive Kamchatka Peninsula in Russia during the late Soviet era. One of the first American scientists granted access there through a joint grant from the Soviet Academy of Sciences and the Natural Science Foundation. Marc's contributions to geology are backed by impressive funding from prestigious sources like the National Science Foundation, National Geographic Society, American Chemical Society, and the National Academy of Sciences. He has been published in top-tier journals such as Nature, Geology, and the Journal of Geophysical Research, where he served as an editor and associate editor. Beyond research, he has consulted internationally on gold and diamond geology for companies like De Beers, Placer Dome, and Anglo American in West Africa and Russia. His popular science book, Voyage of Discovery from the Big Bang to the Ice Age, first published in 1998 and updated in a second edition in 2023, brings complex cosmic and geological history to life for general audiences. But what makes Marc particularly relevant to our podcast is his recent pivot to evolutionary psychology and societal critiques, a shift that blends his scientific rigor with timely cultural analysis. In the last few years, he has published peer-reviewed articles in psychology journals tackling hot-button issues like the evolutionary basis of patriarchy, the gender pay gap, the glass ceiling, and the ethical dilemmas of gender-affirming care. His work challenges what he sees as methodological weaknesses in contemporary feminist scholarship, advocating for empirical evidence over ideology. Just last month, he released his latest paper in Sexuality and Culture titled Evolutionary Psychology and the Crisis of Empirical Rigor in Feminist Studies, which scrutinizes feminist theories through the lens of human evolution and adaptation. Marc is also a prolific contributor to magazines like Skeptic, Free Inquiry, Aporia, and Popular Science, where he's written on topics such as AI threats. His August 2025 Skeptic article, The Contradiction at the Heart of Gender Debates, highlights the tensions between social constructionism and biological realities in gender identity discussions. He's no stranger to public discourse either, appearing on high-profile podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience and the Dinesh D'Souza podcast, and delivering a TEDx talk on why humanity might be alone in the galaxy. Marc's journey embodies the spirit of liberty in thought, leadership in scientific inquiry, and exposing the lies that cloud our understanding of human nature. I'm excited to dive into his latest paper and explore how evolutionary perspectives can reshape our views on feminism, gender, and society. So grab your coffee, turn up the volume, and let's get into it. Liberty, leadership, and lies, because the truth will set us free.
Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, Professor Defant joins us this evening. Professor Defant, welcome to the program. How are you doing down there in Florida?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Oh, absolutely. It's a little bit warmer than up here in Wyoming where I'm working right now.
Oh, are you in Wyoming? Oh, my gosh.
Right. It's been sub-freezing temperatures for the 2.5 weeks I've been here, except for a couple
What's
of
a
days.
Tennessee boy doing in Wyoming?
I do some leadership coaching in the oil and gas industry.
Nice. Great.
And
I used to work for Shell for a while.
Oh, okay. Got a few my fellow coaches that I work with. They're working with some Shell assets down in the Gulf of America right now.
Okay.
But we're here to talk about your paper.
Yeah.
And I put a link to the paper in the podcast description.
Thank you.
But in your paper, you argue that the feminist concept of patriarchy as a deliberate male oppression, it's a myth. Can you explain how evolutionary psychology reveals it as an emergent outcome of women's mate preferences, and how might this align or conflict with creationist views of God-ordained gender roles in Genesis?
Well, I don't know about the gender ordained part, but I can tell you a little bit about the patriarchy aspect, and that is that women, I don't know, feminists have been saying for so long that the patriarchy is due to oppression by males and subjugation by males, that I think everybody in the country has started to accept it, or has been accepting it for decades. And that's not what my research is saying. My research, or evolutionary psychology, is saying that a patriarchy is formed because of choice by women. Let me go into this a little bit of depth, because it's going to take a little while to come around to what I'm saying here. If you go back to hunter-gatherer society, where we evolved some of our characteristics, we find that women choose men on the basis, and this is probably no shock to men out there, choose men on the basis of how much they can earn in their lifetime today. And back in hunter-gatherer society, it was how much bacon you could bring home. In other words, how could you hunt? How could you protect the family? How brave were you to go out there and take down huge animals? So, and this is supported by cross-cultural evidence, where they go out and they go to a lot of cultures and they ask, hey, what's the biggest thing you look for in to marry in a mate? And women across all cultures say that men's earning potential, that's the biggest part of it. Men are entirely different. Men tend to be attracted to the most attractive women. And a lot of people think that's shallow, but it's really not, because we find that the beauty of a woman is related to two things: youth and health. So you've got some physical characteristics that tie into that attractiveness. You can put men into MRIs and you can watch their brain light up when they see pictures of attractive women, but not so when they see men or not so attractive women. So there's a lot of physical research that's been done on this to show that this is true. So why young, though? I mean, in hunter-gatherer society, women were either pregnant or lactating during their lifetime, or at least their fertile lifetime. So the younger you married, the more children you were likely to have. So in many ways, attractiveness is also a surrogate for youth. I mean, for health and youth. Anyway, so this gets back to patriarchy. Women, I think you can see how this would develop. If women are choosing men that have high testosterone, that is, they're brave, they're aggressive, they're not afraid of risk. If you're looking for those kinds of men, then it's not surprising that culture evolves in a way where men take leadership roles. We have a wonderful study that I mentioned in my paper about men and women in a kibbutz in Israel. These are people that left Europe in the early 1900s and Eastern Europe and went to Israel, and they wanted equality for women, and they literally set up their society where men and women were considered equal, and everybody had the same amounts or same number of jobs and same types of jobs. So women worked in the fields, men helped raise the kids, so on. Well, it's interesting that as time went on throughout the 20th century, women started demanding changes, and those changes were they didn't want to work in the fields. They didn't want to take leadership roles. They wanted to raise children. And men, of course, not so much. So men were perfectly happy to switch those roles. And what you end up then is you end up with a society in the kibbutz, which is predominantly now dominated by male leadership. We would call that a patriarchy. That's what that if we're talking about a patriarchy where simply men are in leadership roles, or even in a lot of work-related roles higher up, then that patriarchy is due to choice by women. And I hope you see where I'm going here. So it's not men's fault that we have this patriarchy. It's really indirectly related to going back to the choice for the last 300,000 years of women picking men to have children with, which propagated their genes onto the next generation, to successful males that did the things that females wanted, which was to bring home the bacon, hunt well, and so on. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, it does. It's voluntary. In my worldview, it's voluntary positions based upon the strengths and the physiology of the two different sexes.
Correct.
And each of them are, in my worldview, we're designed for certain purposes. So if you try to subvert that design, it will eventually, like in the example you provided in that was, we'll go back to the original design. The men are the providers, the women are the nurturers. That's just the way we're built.
I'm not trying to justify that now.
Right.
Don't get me wrong. I mean,
natural.
I think women should be treated equally if they work. You know, if they have a job and they do the same work, we should pay them equally. So I'm not suggesting that we discriminate against women. I don't think you are either. But I do think that a lot of women that have, gone down the feminism for the past 30 or 40 years are starting to get into the old age where they haven't had any children. And I think they're thinking back, how would life have been different if I'd raised children? So I find that very interesting. So yeah, maybe you're right. I don't know.
Because each role is complementary to the other. The more nurturing you have, the more the hunter-gatherer provider needs to provide for. So it just, in my worldview, it just complements. They complement each other, and the word for in the Bible is back in the actual Hebrew word for a woman is a helper, because each of them helps each other.
Yeah, I keep getting this reaction when I say that masculine and feminine are ways that men and women are attracted to each other. This seems to be an incredibly audacious, statement that I make on campus. But I firmly believe in that. I think that that's what makes the world go around. And we're going to have problems if masculine stops attracting women and feminine stops attracting men. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of that now. I don't know, because the universities seem to be feminizing themselves. They want, if you believe, and they believe that a culture forms everything, that we're born with blank slates, and you're feminine because of culture, or you're masculine because of culture, it really gums up the works. This social construction attitude, just incredible to me that they can postulate that because they don't believe that we have any biological roots. Just astounding.
Right. Yeah, and you're right. I think we are seeing the examples of that. We talked about that quote I read to you before we started recording, and it's absolutely true.
Oh, yeah.
Now, modern feminism often claims about this multiple times debunked gender pay gap, that it's solely due to discrimination, but you cite evidence suggesting it's influenced by evolutionary adaptations and career choices. What do you see as the biggest lie here? And from a creationist lens, could this reflect divine differences in male and female callings, such as I've been referring to?
Yeah, it is. I'm not sure. Let me make sure that I understand you. You want me to come up with some creationist ideas for that?
No. I mean, your world or your studies and a creationist worldview, they both come to the same conclusion, right? But what do you see as the biggest lie here? I mean, with the gender pay gap.
The gender pay gap. And I cannot reference creationism, but I can reference my work in evolutionary psychology, which is that the gender pay gap, the feminists bring out this graph, and it shows, that men make this amount on average and women make this amount on average. And I think the big lie is that that's due to discrimination. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Hillary Clinton and Kamala Harris say, "Oh, this is obviously discrimination against men." And I do cartwheels in the room when I hear that, because it's not true. And how do I know it's not true? Well, I go out there and I read the literature, mainly done by women economists. And that literature tells us that the pay gap is due to differences in behavior of men and women. Men take on risk. They go out, they get high paying jobs, which expect them to work 60, 70 hours a week. They like that. They thrive in that, a lot of men anyway. And women, on the other hand, are risk adverse. They tend to choose jobs which gives them a lot of variability in how they handle their jobs. For example, if they need to move someplace or switch jobs or take time off to raise children, they want that ability to have their job flexible. So that comes with a price. If you take off 6 or 7 years to raise kids, or 4 or 5 years even, it's lost time for you to be learning in the workforce. And so you don't make as much money as men that don't quit and work right through it. Boy, I heard tonight, I'm going to get off the subject a little bit here, but I heard tonight that the government has been using DEI scores to hold white men back because they're not in the DEI initiatives that were set up by the Biden administration. And that seems to me to be outrageous discrimination. But anyway, yeah, it gets back to things that women choose. Another thing that generates the pay gap is that women tend to choose jobs that support their maternal instincts. They tend to go into social work, into librarian, education, nursing. These are all things that we would expect, I think, people that have maternal instincts high in oxytocin and estrogen hormones, they'll be attracted to those kinds of fields. Not people that are high in testosterone. They're not going to generally be attracted to those kinds of fields. So we see women going into those fields. And what's happened? Well, in those fields, they've become just too many people getting in those fields. So states, for example, that hire teachers, that suppresses the salaries that they give teachers. If you have a lot of people in the field, then they don't have to pay as much to get someone to fill a position. So I'm not saying that's fair. I'm just saying that, that's the outcome of a lot of women going into these fields. And women tend not to go into fields like computer science. They tend not to go into fields like mathematics or even science, STEM, engineering, business, all that. So, and they're desperately trying to get women in those fields, and we keep finding that women don't want to go in those fields. There's been a recent study by Stote and Geary where they found in the countries like Scandinavian countries, or even the Western countries like Europe and United States, that where women have more freedoms to choose, they tend to choose fields not related to STEM. Whereas in poor countries, women tend to choose STEM, probably because they have to. They have to help earn money for the family, so they go into those high-paying fields. But when given openness to choose, women tend to choose not STEM field. Now, this is a general tendency. It's not all women doing this or all men.
Right. Because the gender pay gap is based upon, I believe, it's not an apples to apples comparison. It's an apples.
There you
to
go.
oranges.
And I forgot to summarize that. And that is when you get women in these lower paying jobs, it tends to depress the gender pay gap. So I'm here to say and to argue against this notion that the gender pay gap is due to discrimination. I think there's possibly some discrimination in there, but I don't think feminists have made the case that the gender pay gap is a result of discrimination. Yes, there may be some discrimination in there, but it's mainly, according to these economists, a great number of them are female, by the way.
Right.
They're reporting the facts as they see them.
Absolutely.
And that's the way science should be done. And that's one of the complaints I have about feminism. They're not going out there and studying this stuff and reporting the facts. They've got an agenda. They've got an ideology that they want to politicize. And so our universities, if that's true, are being misused for political action. I think they, should get out of the university and go into think tank somewhere where they can be political advocates for whatever they want. But being a political advocate in a university system goes against everything I've been taught about what the university is all about. We tend to be neutral, and truth should be our guidance.
Absolutely. Let's get on to the next subject. You critique fat studies for ignoring biological health risks, which are tied to evolutionary preferences for fertility signals. Now, how does that expose ideological biases in feminism?
Well, look, if you go out there in the literature and you start poking around, the first thing you're going to find is a lot of literature on fat studies. And there's a lot of people, they particularly hang out in feminist departments, but they can be in social studies departments too. And they have this attitude of health at any size. That's their motto. And look, I don't want to criticize people that are overweight, but I do think that this is doing a disservice to human beings. If you're telling young students in your classes that being overweight can be healthy, I think you're giving those students the wrong message, and that's what I'm complaining about. I don't think we should discriminate against overweight or obese people, but I certainly don't think we should be telling our children that, you can be healthy at an obese weight. And amazingly, I was able to find all kinds of papers that show how, in particular, obesity is so unhealthy for people. The death rate among, obese people is extremely high. So I certainly wouldn't want to run around encouraging, and I don't want other people doing it either, encouraging people, hey, it's okay if you're fat. It's not okay for your health. I mean, if you want to be fat, that's fine. But I don't think we should be trying to encourage other people to be fat.
Absolutely. And you see the obesity rates in our country.
Oh my gosh.
Especially among children is skyrocketing because I think this wrongful ideology that says, healthy at any weight. No, you're not. I mean, I myself, I battle weight all my life. And I know that I feel better when I'm lighter.
Well, I don't mean to insult you at all. And I don't mean to insult anybody that's overweight. That's something that I think we all struggle with. I'm putting on weight when I don't want to, especially over the Christmas holidays. But anyway,
my wife's delicious Italian S cookies.
Well, I'm a big cook and I'm Italian, so I'm making all kinds of goodies at Christmas, and I'm going to regret it when I go back to work. I'm looking for a graph that I have in here on. It's probably back for where I show how the weight has changed. Yeah, here it is. The way the weight has changed. In my paper, you can see where in 1960 the average weight was for a woman was about 127 pounds. That's in 1960. And the average weight in 2015 to 2018, which is the latest data from the CDC, it's gone up to 166, it looks like. So what is that? That's 40 extra pounds that women have gained on average. And this is, by the way, women from 29 to 29. So at the prime, basically the prime of their lives, have, just blown up in terms of, no pun intended, but blown up in terms of adding on a lot of weight. And women, get this, women now, people in fat studies are blaming this on men. They're saying that this is due to oppression by men because we are trying to look for attractive women, and therefore we're making it difficult for women that are overweight. Nothing could be farther from the truth. I mean, yes, apparently women want to be attractive because of the immense amount of money that's spent on cosmetics. So I'm not saying women need to go out there and buy cosmetics to look beautiful for me. All I'm saying is when I was a young man, I was looking for attractive women to marry. I think most men are. And I think that's just fair to say. I wouldn't say that women are shallow because they're looking for a man that makes a lot of money to marry. I think that's all part of nature. But women, it's interesting, women don't see that as part of nature. This objectification of beauty, seems to be, it's seen as all part of the patriarchy, oppressing women, where, well, I don't know. I'm probably saying too much here, but anyway, yeah, it's really upsetting.
Yeah, you cited those dates on that graph that you had there. That 1960s to 2018, that the rise in average weight corresponds to the rise in the feminism.
Yes, it does.
The militant feminism movement in our country.
Yes.
And with that, we're going to take a quick break right here, and we'll come back on the other side. So stick with us, ladies and gentlemen. All right, ladies and gentlemen, and we're back with Professor Defant, and we're talking about his latest paper. And the next question I got for you, Professor, is that social constructionism and feminism denies innate gender differences. You counter with evolutionary universals like mate selection. What's the most damaging lie in that constructionist thinking? And expound upon that, please.
Well, okay, let me be careful here because, and I'm not trying to criticize you. I'm just trying to make sure that I don't get shot in the back or something sometime soon for saying the wrong thing. I'm not saying that feminists are lying. I think they actually believe this stuff, even though you and I might think that it's nonsense. So I don't know if they're actually lying, but that's kind of a minor thing.
Was that Gable said that a lie told often enough is the truth?
Yeah, well, maybe it is among feminists. It does seem like that's how they decide on what they're going to promote. Mm-hmm. Everybody writes some articles, and the one that they think sounds the best is the one they choose, and that's where I get all bogged down, and there's no rigor. Mm-hmm. You're not making decisions on this based on rigorous, rational thought. You're making this on political reasons. But to get back to your question, what was the question now? I've kind of gone.
It's about the mate selection.
Mate selection, yeah. Well, we have to go back to hunter-gatherer society. Can we do that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, that's what it was. You were asking, where you were saying that social construction says everything's culture, that we have no innate sex differences. And by the way, that's how the feminist movement gets away with, saying, oh, well, men can, be women, and they don't argue about men participating in female sports. It's because they believe that you can be anything you want, and none of this is innate. But science is telling us a totally different story. And in order to explain this, I think the best way I know how is to go back to hunter-gatherer society and see what human beings were doing about 300,000 years ago, and the processes that selected for these specific genes that we're talking about here. If I go back 7 million years ago, now I don't want to step on toes here about creationism. Mm-hmm. So we can just agree to disagree if that's a kind way to put it. But from my perspective, 7 million years ago, we have an ancestor called Australopithecus, and he had a brain about the size, a little bit bigger than a chimpanzee. And then over the next 7 million years, we see brain sizes in fossils getting huge until we end up about 300,000 years ago with Homo sapiens, us. And we have incredible sized brains compared to Australopithecus. So, and it makes sense. I mean, it took a lot of time for us to have consciousness, and some might even call it free will. And that takes a big brain to have that kind of ability. And so what's happened with those big brains? Well, the first thing that we notice is that women, the brain of a Homo sapien can only develop 25% in the womb. So babies have to be delivered basically as fetuses. They come out, they're totally helpless. Compare that, for example, to a deer. A deer, when it's born, it's up and running almost right away. That's because, they got predators that'll eat it if it can't, get out on its own. So there's kind of a natural selection there for animals that didn't get up and go right when they were born. And so with humans, imagine a woman having a child that's totally helpless and then being left by the man to raise that child on their own. Of course, they can depend on family, but in hunter-gatherer society, that was a hardship, a major hardship. So we see then this reluctance among women worldwide, a reluctance to have indiscriminate sex. And that's probably a leftover from hunter-gatherer society where women would get stuck with the baby. Or even in recent society, women don't want to raise a child on their own. Now, we have the pill today, which, allows for, I guess, women to have indiscriminate sex if they want it more freely. But there's still some holdovers there. They're reluctant to have, even today, have indiscriminate sex. There's a wonderful research. Can I get off the subject a little bit here? There's a wonderful research paper where a woman took some of her grad students and she got them to go in and they would ask a member of the opposite sex, would you go home and have sex with me tonight? And 100% of the males said yes, and only a couple percent of the females said yes. And as it turns out, there were a few men that said no, but those men that said no had an excuse. They didn't want to insult a woman. They said, oh, I've got a wife, I can't do that, whatever. So I find that very interesting, and it shows how men tend to be indiscriminate, but women don't. And that can be attributed evolutionary psychology wise to behavior in hunter-gatherer society and the increase of brain size. We're very unusual. Humans are very unusual because males offer parental investment. So a woman wants that investment, and if she doesn't get it, she's likely not to marry you. If you look like you're a flighty male who might cheat and horse around and not care about earning money, your chances of getting a high prospect woman fly out the window. So, and they can be choosy, as we all know.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
does that choosier of the two?
Yeah, and so I hope you can see how this is making differences in the way men and women behave. And in addition to that, I tie all this back to hormones. And as far as I know, no studies have been shown to explain how social construction can account for hormones. Males have high testosterone, and our behavior, that's why men are so violent, because we have high testosterone. Now, all this is lumped under this toxic masculinity nonsense, but there are a lot of good things about masculinity. And I try to tell young men, my students, that you should be proud to be masculine. You should be happy and content with that. You're willing to go out and earn a good salary. I also tell my students that you don't have to be physically the toughest guy in town to be an alpha male. All you have to do is get yourself a degree and go out there and work and bring home the bacon, so to speak. So I say, you might be tempted to fight in a bar some night. Well, don't do it. If you're an alpha male, you don't have to do that. So you don't have to prove yourself physically if you're successful mentally. Women will find you, believe me, as you know.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to get off on those kinds of things, but I find them fairly interesting, and that's why I like evolutionary psychology so much.
Right, because there are gender roles that modern feminism are trying to erase or blur the lines between, just because of feels, right? Not the facts. It's because of the feelings.
Feelings. And I think we do way too much on feelings these days and not enough on rational thought. And I think a lot of times men are castigated for being, what do I want to say? Not masking, but just trying to, I don't know,
to exercise their proper already biological role.
Right, exactly. They get blasted for it, and it really is frustrating. Very much so.
Now, your paper also notes in feminist studies Marxist influences that prioritize ideology over science. From your perspective, how has this led to lies about equality and in the feminist movement?
Well, there's so many aspects of all this. You know, I don't even know where to go with that. It's just so obvious to me. You know, so much is. Does this seem obvious to you?
It's blatantly obvious.
Yeah, I don't even know how. Sometimes I'm asked to talk about this. It just seems like we should all know this secondhand. I remember one student I had years ago that came up to me after class, and I said, "Well, what did you think?" And she said to me, "Well, it all seems like we already knew all this, you know." So it was clear to her. I don't know why it's not clear to feminists. I think it's because they want to promote, you know, a different ideology,
right?
And that's so
all that critical theory. It's critical gender theory, critical race theory. It's all that critical theory, which breaks
that's
down
Marxism.
Yep, breaks down typical roles just because there always has to be somebody oppressed. Because I think we're living in an age of the oppressed Olympics. The people that don't follow science, don't follow evolutionary or even biblical roles of each individual, they want to race to the top, be the top of the podium for the most oppressed based upon whatever category.
Yes.
If they have multiple categories of oppression, they get the double gold medal.
Yes. And you asked me about Marxism, and I'm not a Marxist, so I can't tell you a lot of details. I've read a lot of Marxism, and I know how crazy it is. I don't know why we have to every couple of decades revisit socialism and Marxism, but here we go again. We're right in the middle of a whole group of people that think socialism is good. And, it seems like we always have to find out the hard way. We had 70 years in the Soviet Union of lives destroyed because they believed in socialism and communism. And now we're here in America, we're actually having people believe in this kind of stuff. So I think
there is one truth about socialism that people just need to understand. You can vote your way into it, but you always have to fight your way out of it.
That's right. You have to have a rebellion. Yeah, it scares me to death. I should tell you a little bit about the history, though, of how we got these guys. The Frankfurt School in Germany was a Marxist group that got together, and then when the Nazis took power, they were persecuted. And so American universities and professors at American universities, oh, these guys are great. Let's bring them over here and get them away from the Nazis. So they invited them to come here and teach. And so our universities were seated with these Marxists. And so in the 60s, a lot of these Marxists, Habermas and the like, they went out and did their preaching and were quite successful. And now we have a whole socialist movement falling under what you hear often as critical theory, which is, pretty much the Communist Manifesto, if you ask me. But it is basically Marxism. And
absolutely. Now, you suggest the term lived experience in feminism. It lacks scrutiny. It's often treated as infallible. What's the evolutionary basis for questioning it?
Well, it's probably the most unscientific idea that's ever come along. It was very, very popular about 30 years ago. And fortunately, it's died down. It's still running around, but it's out there. And it's kind of a viewpoint position. There were feminists that argued that because they were oppressed, they could do science better than scientists. And you actually had them saying this. And this was all kind of fell under, maybe you've heard of the postmodernist movement, which I never figured out exactly what it was. And when I'd ask people, they'd always say, well, we don't really know what it is. It's just a movement. I'm like, okay, fine. But I think it was this idea encompassed the post-Marxist feminist rebellion. And I think it was a way to undermine science more than anything. Women saying, oh, well, you guys have this thing about evolutionary psychology. Let's just go undermine them and tell them that we know science better. Well, that didn't fly so well. And it's been pretty much critiqued out of business. But I mention it because I still see remnants of it around today. There's still people writing about a superior viewpoint in feminist studies.
I think it's evolved too into what we hear a lot lately in this your truth, my truth, that truth, this truth.
Or it's evolved too in saying that we're privileged, and pointing out privilege to it's evolved. No question. And imagine, I'm friends with, or used to be friends with a person in our feminist studies. She's retired now, but she used to call me and say, look, can you recommend to your students my course in feminist studies? And I said, well, I'll be happy to if I can come in and sit in on it and see what you're saying, but I don't want to recommend it if I don't know what it's about. And she said, well, we don't allow men in there. And I was like, okay, I'm sorry, then I can't really recommend it. And I think that that's what they're doing. They're telling young women how terrible men are. And we're seeing the ramifications of that today because of 30 years of feminists telling women, young women, how terrible men are. A lot of women aren't getting married now. I think they'll regret that. And how sad is that?
I mean, I think, look at the declining birth rate. That's what we have now.
Do you have children?
I have one.
I have children also. And I tell you, it's the most wonderful experience of my life. I would hate to see people give up on that. Plus, it's hurting the country.
Absolutely.
So I would encourage anyone to have children. Well, not anyone. I shouldn't say that.
Right. Having a child is a blessing, and then
yes.
But there are some people that don't need to be parents.
I'm not going to point fingers. But
Now, you advocate moving gender research to rigorous fields like psychology. How has feminism's advocacy role perpetuated lies about biology?
Well, the opinion, that they push, that is social constructionism, is a denigration of evolutionary psychology, and they deny evolutionary psychology. And my point of writing this was because of the lack of rigor in feminist studies that they should be moved out of the university system. Join think tanks, but they're doing the university disservice and a lot of young women disservice, if you're pushing fat studies and social construction and things that haven't been documented scientifically. I think this is the wrong way to go. And you can imagine how popular I am on campus because of this. Anyway.
Right, because you got to look at the aspect of the money revenue generated from those studies too, for completely useless degrees.
You know what, though? I think students are starting to wake up now because, the only way you can have a women's studies pay off is to go out and teach women's studies. So it's self-perpetuating,
Right. A self-licking ice cream cone.
Yeah. And so I just hate to see students getting into something where the only thing you can do in it is to teach it.
Right.
It's just not a good way to. I don't think. And it doesn't give you a lot of security. I know a lot of women that have gone into feminist studies and then ended up going into something else because of my wife works with somebody in the library that did that. And now she's a librarian. And I have a friend down the street and his wife became a psychologist after she went through feminist studies. So I think they realized that if they're not going to go teach it, that they probably need to get into a new field, which is such costly. I mean,
Right.
you know how costly.
But somebody's getting rich off of it.
Oh yeah, the universities.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Are there a lot of women going into women's studies now? It seemed like they were hard up to get people into it because it doesn't give you job opportunities.
They run all the teachers unions in the country.
Oh well, yeah, that might be true. Or they get into DEI programs.
Right.
I think is the next thing.
I had Dr. Stanley Ridgely on my show about we talked about his book DEI, and it's just amazing the revenue generator that scam is.
I didn't realize. Oh, the DEI. Oh, yeah. Oh,
in academia.
Oh, not just in academia, and it used to be. Now, business is getting away from it, but it used to be business. They were making a fortune from the companies that would bring them in to teach all this.
Right now, these companies are realizing that it doesn't increase their profit margin, so it
useless. Could hurt their profits.
Yeah,
as we know from Bud Light.
Yeah.
And Target.
Now, your paper concludes feminist studies is better as politics rather than academia. From your standpoint, what reforms are needed?
Well, no, I'm just saying that a political, ideological program, I don't think belongs in the university, and I don't think. I don't know where it belongs, to be honest with you. Maybe in a think tank, as I mentioned before. But I don't. Otherwise, if we're going to have political things like this on campus, then for equality's sake, we need a men's program. We need men that can advocate for men, because women certainly aren't in feminist studies advocating for men. They're advocating for the destruction of the male. They think that men have all the power, and therefore their objective is to take power away from men. And I think they're doing quite a pretty good job of it. So if you're not going to remove feminist studies from the university, then I think we need to have male studies. And I don't mean gay male studies. I mean real male heterosexual studies to show men that they're not as terrible as we've been painted.
Right. I follow somebody that talks about the forced doctrine a lot. I mean, women want all these things, but they only can have them because men allow it. Because right now, whatever women have, it is because men allow it. Because we could say no, because we are the dominant, the physiologically dominant of the two sexes, that we could dominate the entire spectrum of whatever we wanted. So we are actually much more benevolent because we do allow stuff like this to go on. It's a whole nother interesting rabbit hole I've been going down for the last couple of months on force doctrine. It's amazing that it kind of lines up with what we're saying here, and from your evolutionary standpoint as well as my biblical creation standpoint.
Well, I invite you to come in and tell the feminists that anytime you want. I don't think you'd survive.
Stay strapped or get clapped.
Yeah, no kidding. I think. Well, I don't know if I should get into that, because it is, it is true. I think that this evolutionary patriarchy that I talk about is probably due to the fact that men are stronger than women, and when men in hunter-gatherer society said something, if the woman didn't obey, I guess they had power over them to make them obey.
Right.
But in today's society, I hope that we don't resort to any kind of, physical side of it.
And that's, again, that points to the benevolence of the male species. Right.
Well, believe me, you're preaching to the choir. I live in a university which is pretty much feminized, the whole university. So I'm not saying men are feminine per se, but I see a lot of groveling men on campus. If women say something, boy, they're like, I don't want to ruin my career, or any of that. It's like, go along or get out. So
Well, Professor, it's been a delight having you on the show to
Great
explain
to
all
be
this.
on. Thank you so much for having me.
Where could the listeners find out more about you?
My website is probably the best place. I got off of the social sites when the New York Post was not able to publish its paper on Hunter Biden's laptop. So I left X and Facebook, and I haven't gotten on since. But anyway, so my website would be you can contact me there if you want, or you can get my paper there. It's Marc Defant. I spell Marc with a C, defant.com. Be the best place to look me up and see my papers and whatever.
All right, and I'll drop a link to your website in the
Very
podcast
kind of
description.
you.
And once again, Professor, it's been great having you on here.
Thanks, Larry. Appreciate it.
It does show, I believe, how evolutionists and creationists, the end result is the same, whether how we got here is different, but the end result is the same.
I would agree with you. I would agree 100%.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Professor. Now you have a great evening.
Same to you. Bye-bye. And a happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you as well. All right, folks, that's a wrap for this week and for season 5. I want to extend a heartfelt thank you to Professor Defant for joining us this week on the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Marc, your insights into the evolutionary psychology and the crisis of empirical rigor in feminist studies has been nothing short of provocative and thought-provoking. We delve deep into how evolutionary perspectives challenge some of the core narratives in modern feminism, from reframing patriarchy not as a grand male conspiracy, but as an emergent pattern from adaptive human behaviors, to debunking myths around the gender pay gap and even fat studies through a lens of biological evidence rather than ideological advocacy. And weaving into our discussion on creationism versus evolution has added that extra layer of intellectual tension, reminding us that whether we see gender roles as divinely ordained or naturally selected, the pursuit of truth demands rigor over rhetoric. Your willingness to bridge science and skepticism has given our listeners plenty to chew on, and we appreciate you taking the time to share your expertise. So thanks again, Professor Defant. Safe travels and happy holidays to you. Now, as we bring this episode to a close, I want to reflect a bit on what we covered today and tie it back to the bigger picture of liberty, leadership, and lies. Marc's paper isn't just an academic critique. It's a call to arms for intellectual honesty in a world where narratives often overshadow facts. We discussed how feminist studies, influenced by postmodernism and Marxism, can sometimes prioritize lived experience, or the latest feel-good phrase, my truth, over empirical data, leading to what Marc calls a crisis of rigor. From an evolutionary standpoint, things like male preferences and risk-taking behaviors explain gender differences in ways that social constructionism simply cannot match without ignoring biology. And from my creationist viewpoint, these patterns scream intelligent design, God's blueprint for humanity as laid out in Scripture, where men and women complement each other in roles that foster family, society, and stewardship over creation. But here's where it gets real. If we're not careful, these lies in modern feminism, claims that deny innate differences, equate all hierarchies to oppression, or dismiss health realities for body positivity, can erode the very foundations of liberty. True freedom comes from understanding our God-given natures, not reshaping reality to fit ideologies. Leadership demands we call out these deceptions, whether in academia, politics, or culture, and guide others toward truth. As we've discussed, evolutionary psychology offers tools to dismantle some of these myths, but for me, it all points back to a creator who designed us with purpose, which leads me to this week's wisdom from God's Word. And this week, it comes to us from the book of Genesis, chapter 2, verses 22 through 24. Then the rib which the Lord had taken from the man, he made into a woman, and he brought her to the man. And Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman because she was taken out of man. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. So both evolution and creation scream the obvious. We have been designed for a purpose, male and female. Whether you view it through the evolutionary worldview, like my guest, or through a biblical worldview, like myself, it is the same in the end. Each sex or gender has a purpose, and it's not built upon a discriminatory function. These roles are biologically inherent, but more importantly, complementary, not discriminatory like the modern wave of feminism would have us believe and are forcing down the throats of every student in institutions of higher learning. It was definitely a fascinating dialogue today, and one that challenges us to think critically and live boldly. Now, shifting gears a bit, I have some personal news and updates for you all. As I mentioned at the beginning of this segment, this episode marks the final one of the year for the podcast. As the holiday season approaches, I'll be traveling home to spend my 30th wedding anniversary, Christmas, and New Year's with my bride. We'll be recharging, reflecting, and celebrating the birth of our Savior amidst family and festivities. Now, this is a time to pause, give thanks, and prepare for what's ahead. I know many of you are doing the same, and I wish each and every one of you a blessed Christmas filled with joy, peace, and the warmth of loved ones. Now, before I sign off, I also want to give a special shout out and thank you to the listeners who reached out via email, messages, or comments on my videos with remedies and advice for kidney stones. As some of you know from previous episodes, I've been dealing with that pesky issue as well as another related issue, and your suggestions, from lemon juice concoctions to herbal teas and even some old family recipes, have been incredibly helpful and heartwarming. It is reminders like these that show the strength of our community here on the podcast. Your kindness and support mean the world to me, and I'm grateful for each message I've received. If you are still battling something similar, hang in there. Community and faith get us through it. Looking forward, I'm excited to announce that season 6 of the podcast will kick off on the 12th of January. We'll start strong with an exclusive interview with one of the top conservatives in the Tennessee General Assembly, State Representative Todd Warner. Representative Warner has been a fierce advocate for liberty, limited government, and constitutional principles in Nashville, fighting against overreach and standing up for Tennesseans' God-given rights. Now, this episode will coincide with the convening of this year's session of the General Assembly the following day, and it gives us a timely dive into the legislative battles ahead, from protecting Second Amendment freedoms to pushing back on progressive agendas that threaten our families and our economy. It's going to be a powerhouse start to the new season, so mark your calendars for January 12th and join us as we continue exploring lies, championing leadership, and defending liberty. In the meantime, if you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform so you don't miss a beat. If you're watching the episode on Rumble or YouTube, make sure that you give the episode a thumbs up in addition to subscribing to that channel. Follow us on social media for updates, and feel free to drop me an email with your thoughts, guest suggestions, or even more remedies if you got them. Your engagement keeps this show alive and kicking. As we close out 2025, remember, liberty isn't free. It requires vigilance. Leadership, it isn't about power. It's about service. And lies, they crumble under the light of truth. Whether through the lens of evolution, creation, or just plain common sense, let's commit to seeking the truth in the year ahead. Until next time, stay free, lead boldly, and expose the lies. As always, thank you for leaning in today. God bless you. God bless Tennessee. And God bless these United States of America. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. So until the 12th of January, reveille. It's time to wake up.